or 612-375-9030. Miguel was over there standing by. Literally, he just stood up. There's one of those things, they say if you want to make a bus come, you light a cigarette. If you want to make the phone ring, you start walking out of the room. So don't let him get away. 612-375-9030. Waiting again for Al McFarlane. I see he's there. He's in the Inside News chat. There he is.
Here I am. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Al. I'm just enjoying watching me tread water over here. Just waiting to waiting for your face to pop up. Do this. Now everybody can see me here. You have such a nice camera setup.
Well, you look good. Good to see you. And I want to emphasize how important the pledge drive is. What we do is phenomenal work connecting our communities locally, neighborhood by neighborhood, families, house by house, and connecting to the world. These conversations are rich, they're intentional, they're substantial, and meaningful in every sense of the word. So I want to encourage anybody that's been a supporter and a fan or listener of Conversations with Al McFarlane over the past so many years to show up today and to pledge your support to the station. 612-375-9030. That's the right number, right?
Yep, I got it. You saw me type a 4 there and correct it really quickly. This time of year, I hear that number in my sleep, so I should have been able to type that correctly. 612-375-9030. I'm going to turn it over to you, Al. I see you've got some real conversations ready to go here. So.
Great, thank you. Well, like everybody else in the country, I'm glued to the tube watching the hearings on the question of the Biden nominee for Supreme Court, likely the first African-American Black woman to be on the court. The Senate makes the decision to approve or reject the nominee by the president. And Ketanji Brown Jackson, a double Harvard graduate, is the person who's on the witness stand being interviewed by the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I was really appalled and disappointed at some of the train of questions, particularly from Lindsey Graham. But before I say more about that, I want to welcome my colleague and friend, Clinton Collins Jr., an attorney, also a Harvard grad, a Harvard lawyer. And we had this conversation before, Clinton, where we talked about who the choices were. Once Biden mentioned he'd be selecting a Black woman, we sort of discussed who several likely candidates would be. And you spoke, in a way that was predictive and rung true that the likeliest candidate would be Ketanji Brown Jackson. Walk us through that process again of why you felt she'd be a strong candidate. And if you've been watching or listening to the hearing so far, tell us kind of what's going on from a lawyer's point of view.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Well, I always enjoy these conversations. The reason why I was confident that she would likely be.
We lost your video there, Clinton.
About that.
Here we go. Yeah.
Is that at least in the last several decades, there have been certain credentials that have become very important, or at least have become kind of the qualifying markers. There are 2 or 3 law schools that seem to give you an inside track for these nominations. Harvard Law School, Yale, to a lesser extent, Stanford, but especially Harvard and Yale. Yale is the hardest law school to get into in the country. It's even harder than Harvard Law School because the class is smaller. The typical first-year class at Harvard is 500 students. Yale is half that size. So if you look at who's on the court right now, at least half of the justices went to Yale Law School, and the others went to Harvard Law School, with the exception of Amy Conant Barrett, the most recent person, who actually went to Notre Dame Law School, though apparently she got into the Ivy League law schools and for other reasons chose to go to Notre Dame. And so my thought was the first Black woman nominee, that President Biden was going to want to make sure that no one would question her academic credentials. She went to Harvard College, Harvard Law School. She was a Supreme Court clerk. And almost every justice on the court, or at least most of them, the Supreme Court level, that after law school, many law students tried to get a judicial clerkship, but all clerkships are not created equal. That you have state court clerkships and the federal clerkships in the federal court system. And what you would ideally, if your goal is to get the most prestigious clerkship, is to clerk for a federal judge. And then among the federal judges, there's a hierarchy. There's the district court judges, the appellate court, and the Supreme Court. And what is the most illustrious path, if you want to really burnish your clerkship credentials, would be to clerk for a federal district or appellate court judge and then get a Supreme Court clerkship. People who've had Supreme Court clerkships, if you want to be a federal judge, it's probably the best credential you can have. If you want to go to one of the big Wall Street law firms, they'll take you with open arms. Right now, the big Wall Street firms are paying Supreme Court clerks who choose to join their firm $200,000 to $300,000 bonuses.
Wow.
Sign up with them because they realize how important that credential is and the contacts that you have as a Supreme Court clerk. But getting back specifically to Judge Jackson, she had those credentials. And when we talked on your show earlier about the likely picks, some of the other guests said that politically it would be advantageous to have selected. There was a candidate from South Carolina who was supported by the Republican senators from that state. And I said, that's very helpful. But for the first Black woman, you want to make sure that if people are going to come at her, it would not be because they could question her intellect or her academic credentials. So I very strongly believe, and I guess it turns out I was right, that President Biden was going to lean towards the traditional credentials for this first choice. So when he named her, it didn't surprise me. And then finally, she had recently been placed on the DC Circuit Court, which historically has been as a stepping stone to the Supreme Court, because that circuit, the DC Circuit, often hears cases that end up getting reviewed by the Supreme Court.
So everything aligns.
Yeah, everything aligns in that regard. And so for the Republicans to attack her, which clearly they're trying to do, they're going to have to do it on ideological lines. They can't say that she's not qualified. The woman who not only has excellent academic credentials, she has been a district court judge. She was a federal defender, public defender in the federal system. And now she's also sat on the Court of Appeals. So professionally, as well as academically, her credentials are above reproach. And which is from a strategic standpoint is ideal, because it forces the Republicans to do what they're doing, which is taking these cheap political shots to try to attack her from an ideological point of view, which I think places the Democrats in a strong position, because they can say to the nation, who's the real audience here, here is someone who clearly has the intellectual heft and the professional training to be a judge. And the people that are attacking her are doing it for cheap political reasons. It's not because she won't be fair. It's not because she doesn't have the training in the background. They just don't like her because of who she is and who she represents. And they fear that she's going to somehow affect the ideological balance, which really is not going to happen here. The court has 6 solid conservatives, and all Justice Jackson is doing I'll say all, but I mean what she would be doing,
Sure.
placing an already liberal voice on the court.
So not substantially changing it, but that how this is a high stakes situation is reflected in the fact that it's reported that Judge Clarence Thomas is hospitalized, and we don't know the status of his health. If there's something that we should be aware of more than what we've been told by the court itself, and that is that they expect him to return to work on the cases that are coming up in the next session. But we didn't know about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, how grave her situation was until it happened. So we don't know whether there's a likelihood that there's another choice just looming around the corner.
I don't want to sound overly mean-spirited, but it would not break my heart for Clarence Thomas to leave the court. Now, I'm not wishing him dead or it to be necessarily in poor health, but I would like it if he were gone from the court. He has demonstrated repeatedly he is not a friend of Black people. He is not a friend of progressive causes. And ironically, or not so ironically, I suppose, since he's been there for a while, he is the most conservative justice on this court. I mean, he is, if you want to pick someone who's most likely to take the most conservative position, it is Clarence Thomas.
Interesting. So talk about the theater of the hearing, the purpose of the hearing. We've got a divided Senate, 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. The deciding vote, obviously, will be that of the president of the Senate, who is the vice president of the nation, Kamala Harris. And so by any reasonable expectation, whether or not there is one Republican vote for this candidate, this nominee or not, the Democrats have the power to install her as the next justice of the Supreme Court. But this process is interesting, fascinating, because I watched Lindsey Graham this morning. It seemed like he was attempting to roast her, to actually skewer and demean and invalidate all the things you described as characteristics she brought from her impeccable training and academic scholarship and her voluminous writing already as a justice. But what is the game plan for Republicans in the hearing as you see it?
I think the game plan is they know that she's got to get confirmed. I mean, she needs 51 votes. And even people like the senators from West Virginia and Arizona, who are not reliably Democratic votes, I think they're going to support her. And if it comes down to the 50 Democrats, Kamala Harris as vice president is going to be the deciding vote. So I think the Republicans are playing for the fall. They are trying to preview their attack lines for the midterm elections. And basically they're grandstanding. And so I think that what people like Lindsey Graham is trying to do is they're trying to get their base fired up. And there is some feeling among some Republicans that they want payback for how not Barrett, but the justice before that. You know what I'm thinking of. His name escapes me. That they are mad at how he was treated. The guy who was accused of sexual harassment issues.
Right. I can't think of his name either. I exactly know what you're talking about, but the name will pop up in a minute.
Yeah, but anyway, so basically, there's payback for that, and again, they're trying to preview their attack lines against the Democrats in the fall. But I think they realize that she's going to be confirmed. And the Republicans are in an interesting position because if they go after her too hard, there could be a backlash. And they don't want to run the risk, which they do if they push too hard, of a double standard. I mean, again, this is someone who has checked all the squares. And I know that they questioned her earlier today on Roe v. Wade, and she said, hey, it's settled law. I mean, this Roe v. Wade was decided almost 50 years ago, though it is in danger of being overruled by this new conservative majority. But if they do overrule it, they would have to overrule it. Legal precedent. Roe v. Wade is good law. And what judges are supposed to do is respect precedent. And I think the answers that I've seen so far that she's given have been very judicious. They've been very reflective, and they show someone who is going to review each case individually and render an opinion based on the law and the relevant facts, which is what you want. That's what you want as a judge. You don't want an ideologue. And but I think, again, the Republicans, who unfortunately have a good shot of getting the majority in both the House and the Senate in November, that's what I think they're using this hearing for, is not so much to block her, because I don't think they're going to be able to, but to, again, get their base fired up and to get these Republican nutheads on the far right in particular, ready to just burn everything down come November.
Well, it's like the next level of the Trump model, right? Gin up the base.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if you're lying or not. Doesn't matter if you deal in truth or not. Just fire people up and promote disinterest and dysfunction and this feeling of potential loss of entitlement, and to be losing that at the hands of the other, Black people in particular. That fires people up. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. I'm talking with Clinton Collins Jr., a Harvard attorney, lawyer. He's a corporate counsel for Geico and here in Twin Cities. And we're talking about, this is our second or third conversation over a period of time, the process for selecting the next Supreme Court justice. As you know, Judge DC Circuit Court Judge, I think that's her proper title right now, Ketanji Brown Jackson, has been nominated by President Biden. She is at this moment addressing the Senate Judiciary Committee and listening to a series of probably, I think, half-hour questioning blocks from members of the Senate. And I happened to watch at least part of a line of questioning from Lindsey Graham, and was frankly both appalled and insulted by it. She answered questions from him about Cuba. She apparently had a role in an amicus brief that sought to examine the value of the policy, the legality within our Constitution of keeping people locked up without a trial and for an indeterminate period of time. And I think Lindsey Graham equated her work in that area as a personal decision to free people that were, in his mind, enemy combatants and who he felt should be locked up forever because they represented the potential for damage and danger and harm to America and American citizens. And it seemed to be trying to bait her into saying something that was un-American. I thought she was marvelously able to stay composed and silent and to refer to the law, refer to the text, refer to the process in a way that was respectful to him, but spoke to her not being able to be bullied, because he was bullying her from my point of view. I don't know if you saw any of that, Clarence. What do you think? Clinton, sorry. Sorry.
Hey, associate, even that's my middle name. Don't associate me with him.
I understand.
Well, yeah, as I've said, he is playing for the political base. I mean, to me, what's interesting is that Lindsey Graham apparently was prepared to support a Black woman from South Carolina, mm-hmm. whose judicial philosophy is very similar to that of Judge Jackson.
Her name is Michelle Childs, right?
Yeah, and so, as I've said, I think that he realizes he's not going to be able to block the nomination, and that a lot of people watching, particularly on the Republican right, are not very thoughtful people, and that he knows that there are certain buzz phrases that are going to get them all jazzed up. And so what he's trying to do, but at least from what you've said, and I didn't see her response, at least to those particular questions, but I've had the chance to see her in other settings, and I'm sure she gave very calm, reasoned responses. And the bottom line is everyone is entitled to a defense. And this idea that just because your particular views are not something that are in the American mainstream, that somehow that negates your right for a defense is crap. And Lindsey Graham understands that. He's a lawyer. He's a former Air Force JAG. And I was an Air Force JAG, an Air Force legal officer. And one of the things that you do as an Air Force legal officer through the course of your career is you work as a defense counsel. As a junior lawyer, that's what you do. You defend people who have been accused of all kinds of bad stuff. So Lindsey Graham has been a defense attorney. So the fact that he's trying to take this posture now is not only crap, it's hypocritical.
My friend Kamal King, an attorney from Atlanta, is on the call, as is Angela Rose Myers here in Twin Cities. Kamal King and Angela, thank you both for joining this conversation. What are your impressions? What are your feelings? I am excited. This is a lesson in civics that I think all of us need to pay attention to, and to see how the sides align and what they are doing in the face of the relative certainty that she will be successfully installed as the next justice. That doesn't mean they won't use every second of their time to denigrate her and to weaken American respect for the process that's produced a result that we're about to experience. Kamal, what do you think?
Thank you for inviting, and hello, Angela, and hello, Clinton.
Hey.
Good to see you both again. Lindsey is a politician, and although he was a JAG officer, he understands, and this is political posturing, basically. The question that I don't know who asked it, but the question I was interested in her response to was in one of your briefs, and she was defending, I think, one of the people being held at Guantanamo. Mm-hmm. And they said that she, in her brief, she referred to the President Bush at the time and the Secretary of Defense, who I believe was Rumsfeld, maybe, but I'm not certain, as war criminals. And she was able to skirt that question by saying that she didn't remember it. She didn't remember her the brief. It's been some 20 years ago. And so I've noticed that she has been able to skirt a lot of these, what I would consider tough questions and accusations by saying that either they're before the court or there are cases pending and coming up, so she shouldn't really comment on them. So she's been well schooled, well coached, and I suspect that she is going to be confirmed. I thought that you needed 60, but apparently you only need 51.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I think she's going to be confirmed. She's been well coached, and she's avoiding the tough questions, which she should do.
Angela, what do you think? What's your impression so far?
I agree. And I think that it's crucial for the public to view, like Lindsey Graham's comments and things like that, as Republicans are building up a larger argument on who the Democrats are and their leniency on crime. particularly in this moment when Republicans have found a resurgence in the polls because of this, again, recycled harsh on crime, hard on crime rhetoric. And so I think that that's mainly what we're seeing when we're talking about like Lindsey Graham, talking about Gitmo, when he said something as strongly, I remember he said, I would rather see them die in Guantanamo. I do not care. And that is such a strong indictment when we also know that some people who are held in Guantanamo were not domestic terrorists. They weren't domestic terrorists. They were not international terrorists. They were there, because of a tangential relationship, right? And so that's one of those things where it was appalling to me to see him say that, but it was more because he was talking to an audience that, like Mr. King referenced, is not educated in the history or the substance of the argument that he's actually making, right? The folks that are there, yes, now and for a reason. And, but the history of Guantanamo is not spotless. It is not something of it has so many numerous human rights violations. It came under international scrutiny that even threatened the Obama administration's foreign policy relationships. So like this is one of those situations where his argument was not actually situated on the subject of the argument. It was situated on a larger argument the Republicans are making, saying that they are hard on crime, right? And this was just the opportunity for him to show that and to utilize that. And yeah, that's more how I feel about that. And I also, on the other side, think that our own senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, has been very, very vocal about her support of Judge Ketanji Jackson. And, that I also see as political. But, it is what it is. I mean, it's right to be political sometimes. Sometimes being political isn't a bad thing. But Mr. King, your eyes went big.
Yeah, they're politicians.
But they're politicians.
So, but what did you mean, Angela, when you say you were concerned or surprised about Klobuchar's vociferous endorsement and support? What do you mean? Unpack that a little bit.
Well, what I mean particularly is that she's trying to gain ever since we in the NAACP, when she was running for president, protested her on, crashed her rally, president's rally, a candidate rally, and shut it down. And then the next day she announced she was no longer running for president. And there was then some conversations about what situation in place that she would be in within the Biden administration. Ever since that moment, I've definitely seen her taking very intentional steps to rectify her relationship with the Black community, and then also rectify her relationship as her brand or how she's seen as in relation to the Black community. So I've seen her do it very intentionally, but yet I have not seen her in North Minneapolis. So.
Okay. As far as your comments about Lindsey Graham, his train of thought, and you wonderfully kind of described the conversation issues. And it was as if, as I watched this morning, he was saying, but do you like apple pie? No matter what she said about the details, the policy issues, the considerations of text and relationship to decisions to the Constitution and the principles. At the end of the day, he said, I'm a lawyer too, but do you like apple pie? Which meant, from my point of view, he didn't say those words, but his real question was, do you affirm our thinking, our way of looking at the world? And that way of looking at the world is, as you described, Angela, I don't really care if we take some people from anywhere and lock them up forever till they die. And that seems to me in contradiction to the guarantees not only of U.S. citizens, but I think the principles of humanity of our Constitution. Clinton, do you think that is a fair statement?
Yeah, I think what he's doing reminds me Willie Horton, 88. After the Democratic and Republican conventions, Mike Dukakis, who was the Democratic nominee, was well in the lead, but then the Elder Bush campaign played the race card, and they talked about Willie Horton getting out and raping white women out of prison, and then they waved the flag. And between those two things, Bush was able to turn it around, and he was elected president. And so what Lindsey Graham is doing right now, and I think senator, is to go to the red issues that they know will rev up the Republican base, and that who generally are not sophisticated. They're not lawyers. Not that you have to be a lawyer to be sophisticated, but they're not deep thinkers, as evidenced by the fact that they supported Trump and that whole agenda. And he's playing to the lowest common denominator. And as I've said before, they realize she's going to get confirmed. The real battle here is who is going to have control of the Senate and the House come November. And if Clarence Thomas does go to wherever he's going to go when he leaves, this planet, that's what they're thinking about, is who's going to control the agenda for the second half of the Biden administration's term. And if, again, Clarence Thomas does check out, or if there are other key openings on the court, who's going to be in control?
I told my wife last night, I said, well, because I'm a Christian, I can't wish bad things on him. But that's only because I'm a Christian.
Well, I don't wish the man dead. I just wish him off the court. So, if he could leave the court and still be alive, I don't care. That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Out off the court.
Yeah.
I just wish that they didn't have the power to create policies that impact my life. I wish that they did not have that power.
You sound like my wife.
To create and to frame how my life is going and how Black people's lives are going. So that's one of my things, is that, yes, in my heart, I know that those of the Lindsey Graham, even having met, Republicans who are staunchly conservative in Minnesota, they can be very kind, gracious folk, and, deeply religious folk, and, Christianity, and, community members, things like that. But that does not mean that I want them and their ideology to control the policies that impact my life, the generations after me, and then my community.
Right. And so what do we do? What does the average citizen do? Number one, to be as fully informed as possible, but also to put her or his imprint on the policy making machinery, on the outcomes. How do we make an argument that is embraceable, that's exciting and compelling, so that our people, all people, but our people in particular, find ourselves at the table of decision and weighing in on every consideration for our lives and the lives of those that follow us? Angela, what do you think? How do you see change? Because I hear two things in your comment. One is you wish that they didn't have the power to influence your life as broadly as they do. And if I hear you saying that, the question is, what are you going to do about it? If that's the case, what can you do about it? And what would you rather have in the organization of society, of community? What system of order creates freedom for you in the context of, being an excellent human being, and freedom for other human beings as well? What do you think, Angela?
I mean, that's one of those fundamental questions that I was in a conversation with Dr. Burton Lewis over at the University of Kentucky about is what does it look like in this country for Black folk to walk and to have already been claimed as full people, right? And to walk as full human beings in this country with full civil rights in this government. What does that look like? And fundamentally, when we're talking about the structure of government, there are a number of policy issues that we can address, right? Incremental changes that we can address, and also there is a massive cultural shift that will need to happen. Unfortunately, in my view, the very foundations of the American democracy that we have is rooted in exploitation of Black folk. And so to change that, right, to take this power, seeing that, we have these white men who are rooted in a white supremacist ideology who have power over the lives of Black women's bodies, Black women's access to reproductive care, things like that. How do we take that power back? First, there's small steps that we can take of just even being better informed. Mr. Collins talked about how there are white Republicans who are ill-informed. There are people in our community everywhere who are ill-informed. And there's an industry of misinformation, of making sure that we are not well-informed. I would say that one easy thing that everybody can do right now, figure out who your representative is and sign up for their newsletter. So your city council person, your county commissioner, your state house representative, your state senate representative, your senator and your congressperson, your president, get this information. That might sound like, that's 10 people right there and that's 10 newsletters. But I'm telling you, when it comes to these small issues and then also these small opportunities, I can't tell you how many times I got an email from Andrea Jenkins, who I used to live in her ward, about a community grant that was coming out. About opportunity to sit in and hear a public hearing, right? That's testify at a public hearing. That's exactly the type of knowledge that we need to incorporate. That's a first step. That is an easy thing that you can do today. And it takes no prior knowledge. It takes no degree of learning who your representatives are and then signing up for their newsletter to be better informed of what's going on. Second, following like Insight News, your local newspapers, the Black News is so important because these are points of view that even if you live in a community that is more conservative, you can get this knowledge, right? I was shocked when I lived in South Minneapolis and I opened up the newspaper and they're talking about one of my council folk, one of the councilmen, and he had a little hat on him and it said, this is a previous councilman, Councilman Schroeder doesn't care about crime. And it was him in a little party hat, a little picture. I was appalled. I wrote, you write to the editor about that. You say that is a appalling characterization to put a little photo of him clearly at a child's birthday party and talking about crime, right? And the photo was bigger than the op-ed, right? These are the things that you need to know that's happening in your community, and you can talk back. You have this power to discuss issues with your city council members. There's been many times where city council members or state representatives have CC'd me at the NAACP, sent me a complaint from a constituent because that constituent have reached out to them. They're not the proper avenue, but they have put time into making sure that constituent is heard. Whatever need that constituent has is heard. There are so many times that has happened to me. Why don't we do that more often? Why can't we reach out and have a meeting with our city council person? Why does that feel like, oh, they're up there and I'm down here? No, you're not actually. We are. That's the whole point. We are the reason they're in their jobs. Whether we vote or don't vote, we are still the reason why they're in their jobs. If we didn't vote, that's even more reason why they're in their job. So we have to
Okay.
take that power back, take that vote back, and do a level of civic engagement that is beyond, just showing up in November, on a Tuesday in November. Beyond that, it's actual knowledge. It's actual following these things. And it's actually engaging in community knowledge as well.
Mm-hmm.
Clinton, I'll switch this around a little bit. I think there's not connected, but is connected. Your and my neighbor, Don Samuels, used to be on city council in Minneapolis, representing where we live, North Minneapolis. Don recently announced he's going to be challenging Ilhan Omar, who is the elected representative to District 5 in Minneapolis, to Congress. It's a seat that Keith Ellison held before, and it's a seat that is fairly safely in Democratic hands. But here is a serious challenge from another Democrat who is also an immigrant, as is Ilhan. And my question to you, Clinton, and to you, Angela, in particular, and Kamal, you can jump in where you want to on this. How do you see that playing into this idea, Angela, of people making themselves aware and bringing their voices and making sure that they understand what's at stake in the decisions that are going to be made? How does this contest flow into the general midterm or the 2022 elections? What are your thoughts? Any thoughts, Clinton? Have you considered that at all?
Yeah, I have, and there was an interesting editorial or op-ed piece in the Star Tribune the last couple of days in which someone really castigated Don Samuels for jumping in and talked about a lot of his positions. For example, on the choice issue, that he is not pro-choice. He does not support abortion rights for women or the right to choose. And that's not something which is commonly known, that most people assume if you're a Democratic candidate, at least in Minnesota, that you're pro-choice. That's not the case. And there actually are a fair number of Republicans who are supporting Don. And there is the thought, and this piece that I read really emphasized that this could be kind of a divide and conquer strategy here going on. And they also commented on Don's age, that he's 72 years old. Again, we got to be careful about that. We have a president that's pushing 80. But again, what's really going on here? And is this kind of a Trojan horse, perhaps, by more conservative people in the community to divide and conquer among the Democrats? And I have thought about that. Even though I know Don personally, and I have nothing against him, I think he's a reasonably good person. But on the other hand, he's far more likely to be establishment in the traditional Minnesota sense than someone like our current congressperson.
Angela, what are your thoughts? Have you had a chance to interact with or watch the comments coming from Ilhan Omar's campaign? What they're saying is that they're looking to experience a massive high money campaign and a high money challenge. And I think in the last election, I can't think of his name right now, but the person who challenged her, was he challenging at
Malveaux, Anton Malveaux.
Right. And he, I think, challenged her was he challenging her as a Democrat or as a Republican? Do you remember, Angela?
I think Anton was independent, but there was also a Black Republican. There were three Black men in her last race that had challenged her at different points of her race. John Mason, you had Anton, and then you had another person, I'm trying to remember, who was a Republican, fully Republican.
And I know him. I'll think of his name in a second, too. And so Anton was able to raise a lot of money and to mount a significant campaign. And my sense is that Samuels will be able to raise much, much more than Anton did because he's got a history and is connected. What are your thoughts? And how do you see the incumbent responding? And
Lacey Johnson. That's who he was.
Lacey.
The
Yep.
Republican.
Yep.
So I think that this is probably the strongest challenger Ilhan has ever had. And you remember for when she ran for her original run for Congress, it was, I mean, if I'm going to say it, like, it was honestly a little bit surprising. So no one had come into the race because that position was held by Keith Ellison, and Keith Ellison was a strong incumbent. And so everyone thought that Keith Ellison was going to run again. But on the last day to run, Keith Ellison announced that he was not running for Congress again, not running for re-election, but rather running for state's attorney general. And then that an hour later, Ilhan was at the Capitol filing, right, for her run. So, that's a little bit of a machine move, right? That's a little bit of there was an heir apparent that nobody knew about. But in that, she is able to create for herself in the era that she ran and got elected. And initially she was able to create for herself a national brand, right?
International brand. She's global.
Global. And Washington newspapers talk about her more than I would say even the Star Tribune talks about her. There are international newspapers that talk about her endlessly, where some of our newspapers don't even mention her all that much, because to be very honest, she is a very inspirational figure, a very wonderful woman, a very great woman in the Black community here. She has, when we were had the moment of the riots and uprisings in North Minneapolis, she came to the to NAACP meeting when we were out at Sammy's protecting Black businesses in North Minneapolis. She came, she was there, she was on boots on the ground. And her office has been very great in reaching out to the NAACP around no-knock warrants, and she wants to push the no-knock warrants on the countrywide levels, federal legislation. But when it comes to quantifiably, how many things has she been able to succeed in bringing home to the Black community, but also to the community in Minneapolis for which she represents, there hasn't been as many bills or life-changing things. And even so, last time she ran, it was a question of, did she even fully support Black immigrants when she voted against TPS, and when she voted against, number of, small things. And there's been some even controversies around what she's tweeted and what she's voted against. She voted against giving Ukraine more aid, right? So these are things that have been controversial. But I know where she stands. I feel like I do know where she stands. She has yet to manifest, some of the ideological points that she stands into legislation. But she's still a young congressperson in a very deeply divided era, where even though we say, the Democrats have the House, the conservative Democrats, moderate Democrats are constantly even fighting against her. Do I think Don Samuels would be a better representative for Minneapolis and bring home more legislation that would help Black Minneapolis? No, I don't think he would. But that is just my unbiased opinion. But that is biased. But, everything is inherently subjective and biased if I'm saying it.
Excellent. Kamal, any thoughts or impressions? I don't know if you followed our local politics, and I don't know how this exactly ties in, but I know it does, to the question of the national policy direction represented by President Biden's choice of Ketanji Brown Jackson to be the next Supreme Court justice. And so that discussion is taking place at a national level, and it's one that's generational impact. So at the same time, here in our neighborhood in North Minneapolis, where Clinton and I live, and in Twin Cities, where Angela lives, we've got a question of a candidacy of one of the most progressive, young, visionary, and inspirational voices in America coming out of Minneapolis. I say inspirational because Black boys and girls around the globe look at Ilhan's story as a story of validation that my life does matter, my life can matter, and my future is unlimited, that everything is doable if I'm, hardworking and committed and focused on creating a society, a community that has values that drive it, that are humane. And so I think she is, as Angela said, a phenomenal icon for what the world probably will move towards. But we're in the moment of movement, and that means it's a moment of pain.
Yeah.
And that's where we are at the moment. What are your thoughts, your impressions, Kamal King?
Well, I wouldn't hold against her that she hasn't brought home the bacon, as they say at this point, because she's in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And I think that they are raising the issues, keeping the issues before the Democratic Party. And during election time, the Democratic Party always, says, yeah, we're for that. Like the question with regard to the student loans, erasing the student loans. You don't hear much about that now, but she's on that progressive side that was pushing that. And the Democrats know that they need to go there, but at the same time, they need to govern. They need to be able to govern, and they got elections coming up. All of these, these Congress people have elections coming up. I remember Adam Clayton Powell, and in Congress, seniority matters. So it took him some 10 years before he was able to get on the education, to become chairman of the education committee. And he had one bill, and I don't remember the name of it. Clinton, maybe you can help me. He used to have one bill, and he used to just push every Congress. And he started off, he had no chance of getting it through. But as he gained his power, he was able to get his bills through. So I'm hoping that she stays in, because she pushes issues that I'm concerned about. I'd also like to say, with regard to what we can do, I think, Angela, you were right on with regard to educating ourselves, getting to know. I think that we need to get to know and have our Congress people and our representatives know us. My representatives know Kamal King. And when issues come up that they're like this on, my representative is Hank Johnson. And I've been watching him since he was a county councilman. And he's a politician. And, sometimes politicians, I'm going to say it, they are rewarded for voting in ways that are not in the interest of their constituents. So in his case, we had I live across my lake here from a old abandoned quarry, and somebody wanted to go into that quarry. If you know anything about quarrying, you have to blast to get the marble out. And he was on the fence. But what we were able to do is get the people in our community, small community, blocks, about 10 folk, and watched him. We went to him. He knew that our eyes were on him. So I think that not only educating yourselves, but letting your neighbors know this is the issue, and this is the way we want him to stand on that issue. And although he never would say where he stood on the issue, when it came time to vote, he voted properly. So it's kind of like keeping their foot to the fire.
And just also on top of that, a recognition: you do not need to be a registered voter to talk to your representative. Right. You do not need to be a registered voter. You do not need to be 18. You do not need to be a citizen right. of the United States if you live in their district, right? It might help to be, to have, like there have been times where Alondra Cano, who was the previous city council person before Jason Chavez, she would meet with and discuss issues with undocumented immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. And so that you have, like, there's a precedent there. You have that power. You do not need to be a registered, always been voted voter to engage in this conversation with your elected officials.
Question: How does the press speak about Ilhan, the white press in Minnesota?
Angela, what's your impression?
I think that again, they don't really be talking about her that much. Sometimes there's some like the Star Tribune, which is that major white press here. They'll be critical of her when she was running for office. They were critical. But overall, I remember it was Frontline News how she voted on the Ukraine aid situation for like the Washington Post. It was in the New York Times. It was not front page news here. From the news that day, the newsletter that I get from the Star Tribune every morning has the bullet points. It was the 8th bullet point on the list of news to know about. So I don't know if that's something of a recognition that she's a controversial topic. So many people love her here, hold on to her. They do not want to see her diminished here. And, that's very real. Also could be to her team, who are able to, because of their relationships with local newspapers, able to these potential scandals, dampen a little bit. But, when it's something good for Ilhan, I don't even hear even that much for her wins. I don't even hear, and nationally, nobody's trying to look for her wins, right? But it has to be through these like Mother Jones or, the Insight News, these Black Press or something like that, The Root or something, where I hear about her major wins.
Right. I think, Kamal, that the white press is always looking for the great white hope. And this is a case where they're still looking for the great white hope, even if the great white hope is Black. They're looking for a great white hope, somebody that will parrot, that will represent what they feel are their mainstream interest. And the progressive agenda is not it. And so I think there's a willingness to be silent on her in the face of the strength of her engagement with the constituents, but to the degree that cracks or fissures appear, there will be a willingness to highlight them, exploit them, and to create room for an alternative voice. Best alternative voice would be someone white, probably a woman, maybe a man, but someone white representing Minnesota, and absent the emergence of a credible, viable, winnable white candidate, somebody Black who identifies white. Would be their choice. And they wouldn't use that language. I'm using the language. That's how I call it. So, Clinton, I'm going to close up with you. Any last thoughts or impressions here?
No, that's just an interesting discussion. And I think what you're saying about Don could be, has some validity, that just because you're Black doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily be aligned with the issues most important to us. Hey, Clarence Thomas. And at the time when Clarence Thomas was nominated,
you got 30 seconds.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the bottom line is that all the glitters isn't gold, and just because Don is Black doesn't mean he's going to be looking out for us.
Right. Listen, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you to Kamal King. Thank you to Angela Rose. Thank you to my friend and colleague, Clinton Collins Jr. Great conversation on the Supreme Court discussion presently underway at the U.S. Senate and also on local politics. Join us again next week for Conversations with Al McFarlane. Remember, I do this program every day, 1 o'clock on Facebook, so you're welcome to join us there as well. I'm going to send it back to the station, but let me remind you that this is Pledge Week, and we count on you, listener and viewers, now to support this important work at KFAI. You can pledge your support by dialing 612-375-9030. We'll see you next time. Thanks all.